the bridge that held my family together. They say every piece of land has a story. Ours begins with a bridge. Nestled deep in the hills of rural Virginia sits my family's home, a humble, two-story farmhouse wrapped in weathered white paint, surrounded by tall oaks and wildflowers. It's not just a house, it's heritage. My grandfather, a proud Korean War veteran and master carpenter, built it with his own hands in the 1950s. He raised his kids here, so did my father, and now it's mine. But the most important part of this land wasn't the house, it was the bridge. A wooden structure, simple yet strong, stretching across a narrow creek that divided the main road from our property. My grandfather built that bridge too, plank by plank, bolt by bolt. It was the only way in and out of our land. Without it, we were cut off from the world. But to us, it meant more than that. It meant connection. My father used to say that crossing that bridge at the end of the day felt like leaving the world's noise behind and stepping into peace. As a kid, I'd race my bike across it. On stormy nights, the sound of the creek rushing beneath those wooden planks used to lull me to sleep. When Grandpa passed, we scattered some of his ashes under that bridge. His last wish. He said that's where his soul felt at home. It wasn't just a bridge. It was sacred. And then the letters started coming. They were printed on crisp white paper, sealed with an official-looking HOA letterhead I didn't recognize. The first one was polite, almost friendly. A notice of non-compliance regarding a structure that did not conform to community visual guidelines. I tossed it in the trash. My land isn't part of any HOA, never was. Then came a second letter. This time the tone changed. They cited visual disruption, property code concerns, and demanded that the bridge be removed or replaced to comply with current standards. I laughed at first. Surely someone had made a mistake. But the third letter wasn't funny. It was signed by Cynthia Mallory, the new president of the Westbrook, the state's homeowners association. She informed me that based on a revived easement clause, the HOA had limited jurisdiction over certain properties adjacent to the neighborhood, including mine. They claimed the bridge violated updated community standards and posed a potential risk to public access routes. Public access? No one uses that bridge but me. Still, I drove down to the HOA office to clear things up. I walked into that bland little brick building with its fake plants and motivational posters, and asked to speak with Cynthia. She came out wearing a pencil skirt, high heels, and a name tag that screamed authority. The type of woman who probably alphabetizes her spice rack and fines her neighbors for having the wrong shade of mailbox. I introduced myself and said, "Hey, I think there's been a misunderstanding about my bridge." Her eyes didn't even blink. She looked me over like I was a mud stain on her conference table. "Mr. Keller," she said flatly, "your bridge violates several visual and structural codes. It's an eyesore. You'll need to take it down or we'll be forced to take action." I told her the bridge wasn't on HOA land, that it had stood for over 60 years without issue. She smiled, a cold, tight-lipped smile. "Well," she said, "we believe in keeping our community beautiful." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a power play. I went home angry, furious, but still, I didn't think they'd actually do anything. I mean, who bulldozes a man's private bridge? Turns out, Cynthia does. 2 weeks later, I came home from work, turned down the gravel road that leads to my land and slammed on the brakes. Where the bridge once stood, where memories once lived, was nothing. Just wreckage, broken boards in the creek, nails scattered like shrapnel. The guardrails were twisted. The support beams were ripped out. It was gone. And there, standing across the creek in a freshly pressed blazer and designer sunglasses, was Cynthia, hands on hips, a little smirk on her face, like she'd just accomplished something important. She didn't say hello, didn't apologize, just looked at the rubble and said, "We're doing what's best for the community." My jaw clenched. My fists, too. "The community?" I snapped. "Lady, I'm not even part of your damn HOA. Her response? A shrug. "The easement gives us authority." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just stood there, across the broken water and staring at what used to be my family's legacy. And as she walked away, heels clicking like a gavel of judgment, I made a promise. They took down wood and nails. I'd take down their kingdom. The days after the destruction of my bridge felt like grief, real grief. Not just for the timber and bolts, but for everything that bridge stood for: family, memory, legacy. It wasn't just demolition. It was desecration. For 2 days, I had no way to reach my house except by wading through knee-deep creek water or using a makeshift plank. I set up like some wartime refugee. I called the sheriff. He came out, looked around, and scratched his head. "Well," he said, "it looks like private property damage. But if they had legal grounds to destroy something on my land?" I asked if they had a court order. They didn't. A warrant? Nope. Any notice of intent to demolish? Again, nothing. Just that flimsy easement clause Cynthia kept waving around like it was the U.S. Constitution. The sheriff admitted it seemed wrong, even said he'd talked to the county attorney. But I could tell he was already backing away. Show disputes? They're messy. They tie up courts and paperwork and reputations. Cynthia knew that. She was counting on it. 2 days later, I found a typed note in a plastic sleeve stapled to a post near the creek. It was signed by the HOA, Compliance and Infrastructure Committee, a group that didn't exist until 3 days after the demolition. The note said the bridge had been removed for safety concerns, pending further community consultation, and that I would be contacted regarding acceptable alternatives. Acceptable alternatives? I could barely contain my rage. I wanted to march down to Cynthia's office and scream, but something stopped me. Not fear, strategy. See, my grandfather used to tell me, "Don't swing your hammer until you know where to hit." That night I sat on my porch, a cold beer in one hand, an old photo album in the other. Pictures of my grandfather, young and proud, standing next to that bridge when it was first built. No gray in his beard, just calloused hands and a proud smile. My dad standing beside him as a boy. Me years later, holding up a freshly painted sign. Private drive, Keller property. My blood boiled. But instead of reacting, I began planning. I pulled out every document I had, the deed to my land, county tax maps, historic zoning filings. That bridge wasn't just part of our property. It was part of our history. Our land had existed long before the HOA was ever a thought. The association itself? formed in 1996, my family's deed, dated 1953. I spent the entire weekend poring through dusty files, calling neighbors, emailing the county registrar, and that's when I found it, buried in the corner of a scanned PDF. From 2001, the easement Cynthia had used to justify the demolition had officially expired in 2013. 10 years ago. No renewal. No reassessment. No legal standing. They had used an expired clause to justify destroying private property. It was more than a mistake. It was illegal, but I wasn't done. I started looking deeper. I pulled satellite images and matched them with HOA development plans. I noticed something odd. The neighborhood clubhouse, built suspiciously close to a conservation zone. The community garden they bragged about online, encroaching on a protected wetland buffer. Even Cynthia's personal backyard, with its oversized deck and new hot tub, hadn't been approved by the zoning board. They were drowning in violations. And the more I dug, the dirtier it got. I discovered financial irregularities. Monthly dues being increased without resident votes. Thousands of dollars spent on administrative fees with no receipts. Cynthia's cousin Mark, treasurer of the HOA, no public accounting, no transparency, no oversight. And the best part? I wasn't the only one who had noticed. One neighbor, a retired architect, told me he'd been fined $500 for painting his shutters the wrong shade of blue. Another family had been harassed for putting up a small swing set in their own backyard. People were angry, bitter, but until now no one had connected the dots. I did, and I wasn't just connecting them. I was about to light the whole web on fire. But before I could act, I needed backup. I started filming. Drone shots of the destroyed bridge. Close-ups of the damage. Footage of the creek and the surrounding land. I recorded everything, my statement. The old deeds, the expired easement. Interviews with frustrated neighbors. I built a digital folder full of receipts, emails, screenshots, maps. It was more than evidence. It was ammunition. Then I made the call. Not to the HOA, not to the sheriff. To a man named Alan Brewster, a real estate attorney known for dismantling an entire corrupt HOA board in North Carolina after they tried to evict an elderly couple for having wind chimes. Alan picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. He paused, then said, "You've got a case. A big one." Within 24 hours, he was driving down from Richmond. We met in my kitchen, surrounded by piles of paperwork and half-drunk coffee. He read everything, asked a few questions, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "They thought they were above the law. Let's remind them they're not." And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. This wasn't just about a bridge anymore. It was about respect. It was about legacy. It was about burning their little empire to the ground, legally, piece by piece. And I had just lit the first match. You'd think justice comes with a bang. Sometimes it starts with silence. After the meeting with Alan, my lawyer, things went quiet. Not because we weren't doing anything, but because every move had to be calculated. This wasn't going to be a public shouting match. It was going to be a war in shadows. One document, one law, one exposed lie at a time. I called it the Quiet War. While Cynthia and her army of clipboard warriors polished their HOA newsletter and prepped for another round of neighborhood compliance checks, I was laying traps they didn't even know existed. The first step was exposure. We filed a cease and desist against the HOA for trespassing, citing the expired easement and unlawful destruction of private property. Alan submitted it directly to their board, along with a polite but firm message. Further actions without legal basis will result in criminal complaints. I expected a response, maybe an apology, maybe even denial. What I got was silence. But within a week, Cynthia's tone changed. I caught her walking the edge of my property one afternoon, not smug and arrogant like before, but cautious, nervous. She didn't say anything. When she saw me standing on the hill, just turned and left. That's when I knew she'd seen the papers. She knew she messed up, but I wasn't done. Because as we built our legal case, I started building something else, a digital war room. I created an anonymous email account and began contacting other HOA residents. Not angry rants, just questions. Have you been fined unfairly? Do you know if the HOA discloses where your dues go? Did you vote on the clubhouse expansion? I expected a few responses. I got dozens. Stories poured in, small infractions, unapproved fees, ignored maintenance requests. One woman was fined for having a non-native plant in her front garden. It was lavender. Another man was denied approval to fix his fence because it wasn't the exact shade of approved beige. It wasn't a community. It was a dictatorship with lawn rules. I built a file on every complaint, every violation, every gray area ruling the HOA had made. And every time I found a regulation they broke themselves, I documented it, like the clubhouse extension. Turns out, HOA funds were used to expand the neighborhood clubhouse into a protected wetland zone, a big no-no in this part of Virginia. No permits. No environmental assessments, just quietly done under the radar. But the real gold mine, Cynthia's deck, built within the last year. No city permit, no inspection. And with her cousin Mark, the treasurer, conveniently approving the budget for it, buried in an HOA annual report under community improvements. I got drone footage. I got screen captures of public zoning maps. I even got photos, taken by a neighbor's teenage son with a better camera than the local news. We were building an airtight case, and Cynthia had no idea she was being cornered. Then came the next move, public pressure. Alan suggested we go to the county first, let the system work. But I knew that wasn't enough. We needed light. We needed noise. We needed the court of public opinion. So I took all the evidence, packaged it cleanly, and handed it to a friend who worked as a producer for a local news station in Richmond. Not just the legal stuff, but the story. The personal story. A family bridge. An overreaching HOA. An innocent man on private land being bullied by a board hiding behind expired paperwork. Within 48 hours, the segment aired on the 6 o'clock news. By the next morning, it was viral. The headline read, "HOA destroys veteran's family bridge, but he's not backing down." The footage showed the rubble, showed the deed, showed my grandfather's photo, standing proud next to the bridge he built. People were angry. I received hundreds of emails, messages of support, offers of help. Even one guy who offered to help rebuild the bridge for free said his dad served with mine. It was overwhelming, but not everyone was happy. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Cynthia issued a carefully worded statement calling the news story one-sided and inflammatory. She denied wrongdoing, called the demolition a matter of public safety, and tried to spin it as an effort to protect the integrity of the community. But it was too late, because by then, the county inspectors were already on their way. A neighbor tipped me off. 3 trucks pulled into the HOA's main office that week, clipboard wielding. Officials from zoning, building, and environmental services. Turns out you can't just build structures on wetlands. You can't just increase dues without member votes. And you definitely can't demolish something on private land using a decade-expired easement. The board members began to squirm. Residents started asking questions. Cynthia stopped smiling. But still, no apology, no call, no effort to make it right. That's fine, I thought. Let them sit in silence. I had more coming, because the final part of my quiet war was about to begin. The lawsuit. Alan had prepared it carefully. Destruction of private property. Criminal trespassing. Loss of property value. Emotional distress. And with the news story acting as the court of public opinion, and evidence piling up when we had leverage, we weren't just filing for damages. We were coming for the whole rotten foundation. Because this wasn't just about my bridge anymore. It was about accountability. It was about power being used to bully the wrong man. And now that man was coming with a legal sledgehammer. They waged war with bulldozers. I was about to respond with the law. Sometimes it walks in wearing a suit and tie, briefcase in hand, backed by state law, case law, and a mountain of evidence. That's how I plan to burn their empire, legally. The lawsuit was filed on a Thursday. The 12-page document hit like a hammer. I wasn't just going after the HOA. I named individual board members, Cynthia, her cousin Mark, the compliance committee, members who signed off on the demolition, every single one of them. The charges? A criminal trespassing, unlawful destruction of private property, violation of zoning ordinances, a loss of property value, emotional and psychological distress, willful abuse of HOA authority. My lawyer, Alan, filed the case in both a civil and Erie County Court, doubling the pressure. He also filed a temporary restraining order to prevent the HOA from stepping within 100 feet of my land. They crossed a line. Now they couldn't come anywhere near it. The media caught wind fast. The viral news segment from last week was now yesterday's headline. The new one: homeowner sues HOA after illegal bridge. Demolition HOA president named in lawsuit. We included every piece of evidence in the filing. Drone footage, financial discrepancies, expired easement documents, zoning violations, witness statements from neighbors, photos of the clubhouse expansion into protected wetland, a full audit trail showing years of improper dues collection and nepotism. Alan called it the strongest case he's seen in a decade. I called it more. The moment the court accepted the case, the tide turned. Residents started asking real questions, angry ones. They demanded public meetings, financial disclosures, an emergency vote. People who were once afraid to speak out now stood up, because they saw what happened when one man fought back, and the HOA cracked like glass. 3 board members resigned within 10 days. One even emailed me personally, apologizing and offering to testify. said she never supported the demolition but was pressured to comply. Cynthia? She went silent. Her emails stopped. Her public appearances disappeared. She deleted her Facebook account and locked her front gate. But it was too late, because now the county was involved. Multiple agencies launched investigations. 1, zoning violations for the clubhouse and several HOA-backed construction projects. 2, environmental violations for encroaching on protected wetland areas. 3, financial auditing for years of unreported spending and misused funds. 4, ethics complaints against board members with family ties and no transparency. The HOA office was raided, yes, raided, by the county's legal department. Boxes of documents, USB drives, receipts, all taken into evidence. Neighbors stood on their lawns watching it happen. Some filmed, others clapped, and me? Hell just stood on my porch and the broken remnants of the bridge still across the creek and watched as the empire started to fall. Brick by brick, paper by paper, law by law. Cynthia's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement. Alan refused. They don't get to make this go away with money, he said. They stole something personal. We'll make it personal for them. Instead, we prepared for trial. Depositions were scheduled. Witnesses were lined up. The local news ran a 3-part expose titled, HOA Power Run Amok. The pressure was unbearable for them. Residents began circulating a petition, not just to fire Cynthia, but to dissolve the entire HOA. Legally, it was possible. The HOA was formed in the mid-90s. If 60% of residents voted for dissolution and restructuring, the board could be disbanded entirely. People were furious, and I was holding the torch. Meanwhile, I filed a separate claim for damages. We estimated $180,000 for structural destruction, $65,000 for land devaluation, $45,000 in legal fees, $200,000 for emotional trauma and punitive damages. Total claim $490,000, and we had the receipts to back every dollar. 1 week before the court date, Cynthia caved. She resigned from the board in the middle of the night, sent an unsigned statement through a lawyer, denying personal responsibility but stepping away to avoid further distraction. Translation: she was running, but the damage was done. The court still held the HOA accountable, and on the day of the hearing, with residents, media, and county officials watching, the judge ruled in my favor. The court finds the HOA in violation of trespassing statutes, unlawful destruction of private property, and abuse of authority. The plaintiff is awarded $490,000 in damages. That sound you hear? That's the empire collapsing. 3 months later, the residents voted 71% in favor of dissolving the HOA. It was over. Cynthia moved away. Her cousin, under audit. The clubhouse, fenced off indefinitely pending zoning correction and environmental review. The so-called community leaders who destroyed my bridge, now just footnotes in a cautionary tale. And me? I rebuilt it. The bridge. From scratch. Wider, stronger, reinforced steel, pressure-treated lumber, LED rail lighting. I even had a bronze plaque installed on the entrance, in memory of those who build, and a warning to those who destroy. Every evening I walk across it, sometimes with a coffee, sometimes with a beer, always with pride, because they thought they could bulldoze a memory. Instead, they triggered a movement. They wanted a clean neighborhood. I gave them a clean slate. And every step I take across that bridge reminds me they broke wood and nails. I broke their empire. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But this was justice, served slow, searing, and unforgettable. 6 months had passed since the court ruling. The HOA was gone, dissolved by community vote, its assets frozen, its reputation destroyed. The clubhouse stood silent like a forgotten ruin, the monument of a failed regime. The signboard out front, once boasting community guidelines and upcoming events, was blank, stripped bare. As for Cynthia, word was she sold her house under market value and moved 2 states over, trying to escape the whispers. But stories like hers, they follow you. Her cousin Mark was under active investigation for financial misconduct. I heard he tried to run for another board position in a different county, but someone leaked his name to a watchdog blog. The article went viral in HOA forums across the country. His name is Garage Digital Poison Pies now. They tried to erase my bridge. Instead, I erased them their future. But this chapter isn't about them. It's about what came after. It's about my rebuilding. I didn't want to just replace what they destroyed. I wanted to make something unworthy, something my grandfather would have been proud of. He built that original bridge with his hands. No contractors, just wood, sweat, and grit. So I did the same, with help from volunteers, neighbors, friends, even strangers who saw the news and drove hours just to lend a hand. One guy, a veteran like my granddad, brought old reclaimed oak beams from his family farm in North Carolina. Said he couldn't offer money, but he could offer history. I want this bridge to have a soul, he said. And it does. The new bridge is a beauty. Reinforced steel base, weather-resistant wood planks, side rails with embedded LED lighting, a gentle arch that curves like something out of a movie, but the real centerpiece, outer bronze plaque, bolted into the first post with an inscription. They tore down a bridge, so I built a legacy. The first night it was done, I walked across it alone. The wind was calm. Crickets chirped in the woods. The reflection of the lights danced on the water below. I reached the other side, turned around, and looked at what we had built. Not just a bridge, a statement. A message to every bully in a boardroom, to every petty tyrant hiding behind policy, to every Karen with a clipboard and an inflated ego. You don't get to destroy what you didn't build, not without consequences. A few days later, a local journalist came to do a follow-up story. She asked me, "What kept you going through all of this?" I told her the truth. It wasn't just about the bridge. It was about standing up to people who thought they could do whatever they wanted, and finally proving them wrong. She smiled and said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just rebuild a bridge. You burned theirs." Now I get emails from people all across the country. A woman in Texas who stood up to her HOA for demanding she repaint her house every 2 years. A man in Arizona who exposed his HOA president for embezzling dues into a personal fund. A couple in Oregon who won their land back after the HOA tried to claim it through a forged plat map. They all say the same thing. Your story gave me courage. That's when I realized this was never just about me. It was about all of us. People tired of being pushed around by unelected neighborhood tyrants. People who finally decided to say enough. I walk that bridge every day now, Sometimes in the morning with a coffee, sometimes in the evening with my dog, always with peace. And every time I cross it, I touch that bronze plaque, a small, simple reminder of my grandfather, of justice, of the war I never wanted but refused to lose. Let them come again if they dare. Let anyone try to take what's mine, what's earned, what's built with love. Because now they know I don't back down. I rebuild. I rise, one nail at a time.